Tell us the story. You're feeling rebellious about it. I think at the same time it would be beneficial just to start, even if it's not the 20 years for the entire. Start and see how you feel. This is one of the
so that people can get those colors.
Guess we just somebody needs to check up there and set it up.
Oh, I can go there.
Yeah.
Check. Would you like me?
Sure. I
Okay.
would need to.
Let me go there.
A link.
Okay. Well, we have my phone. You want to share?
I can. Okay. Let me see. Let me make sure we got the right link before you run up there.
If you text me, I can put it. I can copy it. But you can email me too. It's just that I'll have to open on my account, and I think it's already on somebody else's account.
Right. Yeah, that is right. Let me think about the best way to do it. Because there may be.
Oh no, oh no, it's taking out a butterfly from, you know, Hope Hospital? Almost like a home slash hospital with people who are terminals. There's a one big terminal with illnesses. Yeah, they take care of, they take care of, and that's where my dad was. My sister and I had, that's what, like, whenever people ask, I'm like, no, it's just not a random butterfly. Oh, that makes sense. It does be like, not to like to you. To you? Like a baby. I didn't know. For beautiful. Yes.
Beautiful.
I think if you just go to YouTube and look for that.
Okay, that's easy.
The 2016 Lozano Long Conference.
Okay.
Yes. You have my number. If you can't find it, I'll send you something. Yeah.
So it's like I was there about
I know, after this I'm gonna have to hopefully.
I can't believe you guys saw the chips.
Oh, Brian.
I know, I'm really bad at keeping just because if you're within a 5-mile radius, forget about it. But you're within a 40-acre radius, and so you say, where are you? Where are you working? I'm not sure, but we're waiting for wait,
I still love to write the email and I always write everything. Like maybe
I feel like I haven't seen you in like this.
Hey, what's up? I was just talking to Alfonso about you.
Yeah, I went to his office hours yesterday.
Yeah.
Interesting class, thank you.
Yeah, you like it so far?
Yeah, it's different from your style, like it's more political.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's really great.
What else you taking this semester?
Cuban Revolution with Jonathan Brown.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's what he wrote a book, a whole book on it. So yeah, he's making us read a book, and I chose Che's Fall in Bolivia. So I'm doing that. Also, ancient Greek medicine. Mr. Alfonso's class.
Yeah.
God, they always seem to slip mine. Cannot remember it at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, good to see you with them.
We have a long way to go.
Hi, Carla.
And talk
Yeah, I think it's catching in all the... Let me text you the link. I think that will be the safest thing to do. Okay, give me just a minute. Thank you.
We're very friendly. Oh my god, we're so bad at this. I'm trying to or you're just gonna shamelessly email people? Hey, how are you? I haven't seen you like in a year. Yeah. I know, but I'm never over there. Yeah. Are you graduating this year? Yeah. Yeah, me too. Do you find a job? How's that going? Thank God. I finished the CV. Oh, no.
I'm just trying to get super now.
You're just gonna be the back guy?
No, I'm just gonna wait for it.
Oh, in the aisle? Yeah. Oh, okay. Never mind.
Definitivamente quieres animarnos a que hables del podio.
Good. I didn't see you there.
Yeah.
Sat down.
Yeah. I sent you an article referencing.
No, I haven't looked.
Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna help. It's this article I found from the 1970s. Eminent domain in the 19th century in the American West. Like
That's really interesting. Yeah.
It's like hardcore legal analysis, but it's happening at some point. But this project is something else that just is for like, how did, what does that mean, consolidate?
Yeah.
How did get from one communication and transfer it to
Yeah.
So maybe it'll work.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it'll be interesting for no other reason than like eminent domain is like always talking about texting. Like it's just like political.
There will be simultaneous interpretation between English and Spanish for this event.
So if you're not bilingual in both languages, please feel free to take out some headphones outside in order to hear the simultaneous translation. Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. En este evento estaremos brindando el servicio de interpretación entre el inglés y el español. Entonces, si no son bilingües en ambos idiomas, favor de recoger un equipo afuera para poder escuchar la interpretación simultánea.
Yeah.
You know, there's always something which continues to
I just feel like it's interesting too in Texas context because, like you said, 96% of Texas is like privately owned. And so thinking about like what that means politically for the state is really interesting. You know?
Yeah, it really is. And not just that, it's so
Yeah, I saw this article the other day that somebody posted. It was about water in Texas and how farmers had sued the state of Texas because I think that like due to the drought, the state was trying to like take water from the farmers and redistribute it in some way because the drought had gotten so bad in certain places. And they appealed the case, and the judge found in favor of the farmers who privately. Yeah, I believe the Statesman wrote an article about it. Yeah, and I just like remember thinking like about that and how like what that means. Like I hadn't thought about that aspect of it, you know. It also means water rights. With global warming, what does that mean?
Yeah, water rights are really depends on the state, depends on what it is. But what's so fascinating about the situation is something about it, and it was only found that you could create a version when you might go so the state organizes the transfer and the justification is it's predicated on
yeah, I was gonna say it's like the mixing of productivity, economic model,
and so if you're just like living by the river and enjoying the view and raising some crops for your benefit because you have had title for a number of years, that's not good enough.
Yeah, you have to put it to use.
Yeah, exactly, you have to put it to use.
Well, I think the only thing that, like, the only thing that has saved the Great Lakes from, like, some capitalist or somebody coming in and trying to take the water is Canada, because it's technically not just, like, Michigan's water.
Yeah.
It's also Canada's.
Yeah, that's
and
very
so,
interesting.
I think it's the only reason that water has not been, like, siphoned off by somebody.
Whereas Mexico is more than happy. Mexico is its own water problem. But there isn't a fundamental difference in really the kinds of times and there's been a significant change what about that there is.
The LBJ's school, as a part of your first year, you have to do like a year-long midterm project. Do you know about this? So you have to do it as a class, and one of them this year is working with somebody out of El Salvador with water rights. I think I'm actually going to go out with a friend over spring break. The first year, she has to go out again because we didn't get enough survey results for like
Yeah.
and so they're doing something with water rights out there.
You know, I know a woman who runs this nonprofit down in Chihuahua City. I met her at this barbecue back home. And she was up with, it's a long story, but I make it fun. So we get in a very long conversation. Walk me through observation. And I'll tell us the way. And it's an old thing. Still speaking in the version of like the literature they have for generations. And they drill it over and over again. They grow and I asked them, so how do they get around? And they have special provisions, almost protected. So like what we would call a protected.
Yeah.
Because they went there as religious refugees. And they were.
Yeah.
Right? Like from the United States.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I asked them, so what do? They pay bribes, how do they get around this? No, they do the reverse. They pay multas. What is this word?
I don't know. I've never heard that one before.
Fines.
Oh, okay.
Fines, yeah. So it's the opposite of doing whatever you want to, like, you can either do what you want to do by bribes.
Yeah.
Or you can do what you want to do by, like, oh, I'm going to do it, so fine.
That actually sounds very, like the way they would do it in the United States.
Yes, it's like by the book.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like carbon taxes and fine.
Yeah. Or like what Monsanto does with like farm workers.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, yeah. The odds that I'll get sued.
Right. And if we do it too fun,
yeah.
And that's what
No, I don't think Sarah ever brought it.
So he's on the design.
Okay, I will.
He's trying to study he's from Chicago. He does water It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So there's somebody here from that point of view as well.
Yeah, I had this job last semester. It was like a job. So I would like go to the legislature and just take notes on like these water meetings. Yeah, and I remember Eddie Lucio, he's the state rep from Cameron County. Like, you know, it was basically a bunch of like white guys from the Panhandle in West Texas talking about like the federal government coming in and taking their water, right? And then like, you know, Eddie Lucio would jump in and just go on this like some of the rant about how like, you know, Mexican and like I didn't know enough at the time to really understand it, but he was just talking about how like Mexico owes us water and like like what that means for Cameron County on the border and
I wrote a plane sat next to this lady years ago who was like from El Paso and the guy who deals with like the water rights issues and I was like, man, that is I was like, I said it more
definition of a thankless
like,
job.
I'm like, wow, that sounds like a stressful job. I have no idea. But that's not like a North and South very much it's two economic systems that are talking about what the everybody gets more.
Well, it also feels like it also in some ways felt like a proxy fight. Like, while they actually do want more water, like, that's not really what they're fighting about. And so it's just like, oh, that's why.
I'm dying to they have a student write something about all the from the 1930s all the way to the 60s. All of it. Just like 5-6 games.
Yeah.
On maybe a ring, like 3 person significant living down the alley.
I've never seen a dam until I moved to I lived there for a year. A friend took me up and we stopped at this huge dam, and I know what a dam is, but I never really grasped the concept until I saw it and why you would want a dam. And
translation. We have equipment over there. So I am Rebecca Torres, faculty member here at UT in the Department of Geography. You want to get it up? Okay, the volume. So I'm a faculty member here in the Department of Geography and Environment here at UT. And on behalf of my conference organizer, co-organizer, Dr. Alfonso Gonzalez, a faculty member in the Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies, or also as we know, LLILAS, and the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies, MAUS, we are very delighted to welcome you to this conference, Derechos and Crisis, Refugees, Migrant Detention, and Authoritarian Neoliberalism. This is the 2016 Lozano Long Conference. So tonight we are fortunate enough to be joined by participants from 2 conferences, the Lozano Long Conference, but also Charting Research Directions for Children of Immigration, which is a conference that is being organized by Dr. Luis Sayas, who is the Dean of Social Work here at UT, as well as Dr. Lori Heffron. And we have put together a plenary panel this evening of excellent panelists who are going to provide us with a contextualization for the other 2 conferences. So contextualization of neoliberalism, forced migration, and the situation with Mesoamerican refugees. But first, before we get into that, we would like to thank our distinguished speakers. We have activists and advocates and scholars from Central America, from Mexico, from the US, and also here at UT. And we are very excited to learn from you, to exchange ideas, and we're hoping that this will also serve as a forum to seed some future new collaborations. We have intentionally in the program built in plenty of time so that you can also make individual meetings with each other, so you can network, and so that you can also try to enjoy yourselves while you're here in Austin and hopefully have a little bit of time to see our great city. We'd like to thank LLILAS, not only for the resources and the tremendous organization that made this conference possible, but also for putting Latin American refugees front and center. We are very grateful to Charlie Hale, the director of LLILAS Benson, and also for Paloma Diaz, the scholarly programs and faculty liaison director. Many of you have probably had a lot of contact with her. She really is the glue that holds this conference together. So we're very grateful. And also to all of the student volunteers who have been giving so much generously of their time and who will do so in the next couple of days. We're very grateful to our co-sponsors, the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies and the Center for Mexican American Studies. And also, I just want to remind you to please take a program of the events for the next 2 days. We have a really excellent lineup of panelists, both for Thursday and Friday. We also have a dance and a fundraiser that is Friday night, and it is organized by Grassroots Leaderships and also the Human Rights Alliance for Refugee Women and Children, and it's going to be held at Mimales restaurant here in Austin. And tonight, after the plenary, we really hope that you stay with us and enjoy the reception, and we're going to have food, and we're going to have a wonderful performance by singer and songwriter Salvadoreño Mauricio Callejas. So now I'm going to turn it over to Alfonso, who is going to introduce some of our other
welcome speakers, and then later he's also going to sketch out for you this framing theme of our conference, which is Derechos en Crisis. Thank you.
I want to say thank you to Rebecca Torres. Rebecca Torres has been a wonderful collaborator, a co-organizer with this conference. We had really a great committee for the Lluvia de Ideas, for the ideas that really came together for the conference. I want to thank Shannon Speed, who was instrumental especially in those initial stages with the conference. We've lost Shannon Speed to UCLA, but she's back, and we love her. She's a great colleague. In addition to Shannon, Luis Dias was part of those initial conversations. Denise Gilman. I think there's other people too. I'm slipping on some of the names. I'm sorry if I forgot some of the folks that came together at this initial meeting. But we had a really great dialogue with Paloma, Shannon, Luis, and myself about what kind of conference we wanted to put on. And so I want to thank that committee for really coming together and bringing some of the main concepts together. In addition to those folks, of course, we had tremendous support from LLILAS and from Mexican American Latino Studies. I'm going to bring up Charlie Hill, who is the director of the Lozano Long Institute for Latin American Studies and Benson Library Collections. Charlie's going to give us a few thoughts about the conference just to open up the conference officially on behalf of LLILAS. Thank you, Charlie.
Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be able to welcome you to this fabulous space of now a couple years old LLILAS Benson Latin American Studies and Collections Conference Room. And it's an enormous pleasure to welcome you to what promises to be a very exciting 3 days. For the past 7 years, we've been honing the concept and the practice of these Lozano Long conferences. These feasts of scholarly interaction, intertwined with and enriched by compelling calls to action. Este diálogo de saberes que nos invita a imaginar una unicidad consecuente con las sociedades que queremos construir. Each year after the dust settles, we reflect on the lessons learned and generally conclude, now that will be an awfully hard act to follow, before starting it again. So let me say briefly why I think Derechos en Crisis belongs squarely within that tradition. First, this conference has come into being through abundant intellectual inspiration, political commitment, and hard work, virtually none of which was provided by the LLILAS Benson director. And, sorry, Javier, relatively little by the LLILAS Benson director of public programs. The best measure of vibrancy of any great organization is the empowered agency and efficacy of all its members. The program in your hands this afternoon is the creation of Professor Alfonso Gonzalez, Professor Rebecca Torres, their steering committee, and I do want to give a special thanks to Shannon Speed. Alfonso said she's moved to UCLA. What I wanted to say is that she's actually moved to become the director of UT's newly opened West Coast And we're here, of course, although Paloma asked that I not recognize her as I always do, but I want us all to recognize Paloma Diaz, her legendary talents and dedication as Director of Scholarly Programs. Second, a hallmark principle of the Lozano Long Conference and of LLILAS Benson more broadly is that our scholarly program should affirm long-standing relations of collaboration across campus and across the hemisphere, and also inaugurate new ones. We value immensely our tradition of reciprocal support with CIMAS and MALS, as Alfonso mentioned, thanks Laura Gutierrez. And we're equally excited to have partnered with the School of Social Work in planning these two convergent encuentros in tandem.
The arrival, I don't think Dean Sayas has gotten here yet. There he is. All right, he did show up. Good. The arrival of Dean Luis Sayas to this campus 3 years ago is forcing me to rethink well-established theories of how universities change. What an amazing difference one visionary leader can make in moving forward campus-wide projects and principles to which we're all committed. Thank you, Luis. Third, this conference may well go down in history of LLILAS Benson for its amazing timing. Naming a topic more than a year ago that's grown steadily in thunderous importance ever since. But to attribute this to prescience would be to miss the deeper argument that the conference organizers want us to debate, refine, and assimilate. I'm reminded of a Lozano long conference a few years back when we ended making a collective vow to ban the phrase natural disaster from our vocabulary. There are natural events, we learn, which take on, for political, economic, racial, and other reasons, more or less disastrous social consequences. Our challenge this year involves an even more radical mental exercise. Every time we hear the phrase refugee crisis and its many variants, can we transpose thought and action, seeing this as a symptom of an underlying crisis of neoliberal democracy across Latin America and in the US? By focusing on derechos in crisis, the organizers argue, we can fully register how the problem has grown steadily worse under 8 years of a liberal, supposedly race-conscious Obama administration, even before making sense of the barbarities of Trump and his ilk. Thanks to the organizers for giving us such a challenging and appropriately Gramscian mandate. Finally, and with my apologies to my university colleagues, this topic is way too important to leave solely in the hands of academics. There's no possibility for an effort like this one to yield new understandings, much less strategies for effective action, unless our dialogue is framed from the outset as a frank, horizontal exchange between university-based intellectuals on the one hand and intellectuals located in communities, grassroots organizations, policy centers, and social movements on the other. Those who are producing knowledge as they struggle daily to effect change. Quite apart from what we learn about our derechos in crisis, I hope we'll also glean new insights on how to get this diálogo de saberes right. And in so doing, energize our commitment to keep on trying. Thank you.
Very, very powerful words, Charlie. Thank you. I want to respond to them already, but I want to bring up some of the folks who also made this possible. Before I bring up the chair of Moss, I want to bring up Dr. Luis Sayas, who is the dean of the School of Social Work and the author of a recent book, Forgotten Citizens. It's a book with Oxford University Press on children who've been deported to Mexico. It talks about the new American exiles. I know I'm butchering your title a little bit, but you can tell us more about your work. We're having a parallel conference with School of Social Work on unaccompanied minor children and undocumented youth. So there's a lot of synergy between both conferences, but we hope that we can steal some of the folks from your end, and you can steal some from ours, and we can have a dialogue. And you're all invited, of course, to the reception tonight, but also to the fundraiser on Friday to support some of the work of the community organization. So I'll bring up Dr. Gustavo.
It seems to me that only at UT could this happen. To have two conferences on similar topics, coming at it from different perspectives, and to do it with mutual support and mutual respect. And both respect for the individuals, but respect for the different disciplines and areas that we represent. So I'm just thrilled that we're able to do it and to show the rest of academia that even silos can be shattered and a lot of traffic can be created between institutions within a university. Indeed, what we have at the School of Social Work is a conference funded by the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, and it is about unaccompanied children, undocumented children, and children citizens whose parents are undocumented. And we have brought together scholars, some of whom are here with us in this setting, and we will be going back and forth as best we can. We'll may have to get a shuttle, but it's we're talking about kind of the issues around behavioral and social sciences. What are the mental health needs, the health needs, what's happening to children who are in detention centers, who are living in other countries of Latin America because their parents were deported, though the children are US citizens. So in the book, I titled, the book is Forgotten Citizens, Deportation, Children, and the Making of American Exiles and Orphans. The exiles are those who were forced to leave our country to live somewhere else with their parents. And the orphans were the children who were left behind when their parents were deported. And neither of those is anything to be proud of, for our country to be proud of, and certainly for the present administration, Washington administration to be proud of. I think it's horrible. That's not what we do. And it's only gotten worse, as you know, through the detention centers that we have here in South Texas. And we're fighting very hard as academics and as activists to release them, to have them released. The battle is both national through the class action suits that have been brought against the government, but also local. We're fighting the Texas Department of Family Protective Services from giving or rendering licenses, calling these detention centers child care facilities, where you don't see the outside because there are walls. You can't really have your mom cook you a meal. You have no privacy. You don't know what your future holds. But the state of Texas is going to give them licenses as child care facilities. None of us would want our children in those facilities. So we're fighting the battle here and across the land. And it's important that that battle, esa lucha, will have the voices of folks like those who are attending the Derechos en Crisis conference, as well as the ones who are working with us just down the street on campus, working on a research agenda where we can influence policy about the impact on the mental health of children who are undocumented, unaccompanied, or citizen children living in the U.S. as orphans or abroad as exiles. So when I came to Texas, I wanted to create as much collaboration as I could, and fortunately I came to LLILAS, met Charlie, and felt the warm embrace of LLILAS and LLILAS Benson to do the work together, and they know they also have a place at the School of Social Work. So thank you all very much, and again, come over tomorrow and Friday and visit with us over at our meeting. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to bring up one more person before we get to the panel. Someone who is the interim director of the Department of Mexican American Latino Studies, someone who estimamos mucho in our faculty, Dr. Laura Gutierrez. She stepped in as chair earlier this year, and we're absolutely delighted with her leadership and presence. So Laura can say a few words on behalf of Mexican American Latino Studies.
Thank you, Alfonso. And I want to also acknowledge the hard work that both you and Rebecca Torres have done. Having been the organizer of last year's Lozano conference and still recovering from that, I know the sort of the hard work. But it's also, you know, and I'll steal a few words from Charlie. I think the ways in which that the Lozano Law Conference, at least, you know, what you are doing here this year, and also what we attempted to do last year, in terms of sort of thinking about cross-pollinations. So not just in terms of the ways in which the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies is co-sponsoring this amazing event here today, and being one of Alfonso Gonzalez's departments. I want to also sort of think about cross-pollination, not just across units, not just across, with the School of Social Work, and then also the Center for Mexican American Studies and our department, but also, and LLILAS, but also, with the community, hemispheric, those types of dialogues that are important, that are also urgent. I think that the ways in which you have come together to organize this amazing group of people to think through some things that are urgent for us at a professional level in terms of how we think as scholars, but also as people, how we feel and how we act, right? So I want to welcome all of you on the behalf of the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies. I hope that what sort of begins here continues further to affect for the better. Thank you.
So before I bring up the panelists, I just want to kind of lay out some of the main concepts that we've been really dealing with. This conference, like a lot of conferences, is really born out of frustration, right? A frustration of being here in Texas and listening to the discourse on refugees, on migrant detention, especially, Texas is the epicenter of migrant detention. There's anywhere from 25 to 30 detention centers here in Texas. And there's at least 2 family detention centers here in Texas. And if you haven't been to a family detention center, it's really one of the saddest things that you could ever attend. I remember the first time I went, as being a father, I couldn't, the only thing I can say is when I left, I said, I feel like I need a limpia, because there was so much sadness in these rooms of seeing people detained, seeing 2-year-olds detained, toddlers. I have a 2-year-old myself, so it was really, really difficult to see that. And really, I think what we have in Texas is more than, it's not a refugee crisis, and that's really been the discourse that's been used to talk about this, a refugee crisis. And we've even had events where we had the word refugee crisis in the title, and there's something was unfitting, unsettling about the word refugee crisis. And I think people wanted to use refugee crisis because there was a spike in the number of people that came in 2014. There was 60,000 unaccompanied minors and another 60,000 family units that had came in from Central America, mostly from Central America. But it's not necessarily a refugee crisis for us, but really una crisis de derechos, no? A crisis of the rights regime, right? There's this thing called the 1951 Refugee Convention. It's not being applied to these refugees, to women and children, to families. And it's also not just a Central American crisis, but a Mexicano crisis as well. And it's something that's been going on for years. I was talking to Alex Sanchez earlier. In 2003, when I started, 1999, I started working with Alex. But around 2003, we began collaborating on asylum cases for Central Americans who are being deported back to El Salvador. And people have been losing their cases since, well, really since the 1980s. In the 1980s, over almost 90% of all Central Americans lost their asylum cases. In 2014, only 1% of Mexicans won their asylum cases, despite the severe violence in Mexico and the breakdown in the security. And the breakdown really in the ability of the state to provide any meaningful existence and protection for people. So for us, this is not just a refugee crisis, but una crisis de derechos, una crisis del Estado, una crisis del modelo neoliberal en Mexico y en Centroamérica, a crisis that's really deeper than people filing an I-589 form, which is the application form that you sign when you want to apply for asylum. This is a systemic crisis that deserves an important dialogue. And that's really the spirit of us being here today, to have a dialogue with scholars, with community organizers, with advocates, and with people who've been directly affected by the detention asylum regime. It's extremely important that we think about this in a systemic way if we're going to have systemic answers, right? Because it's not just about winning people's asylum claims either, right? That's why we don't really have a strong legalistic. We have important lawyers that we invited to be part of this. Carlos Spector, Barbara Hines, Denise Gilman, but we also know that this is not just about winning people's cases. This is about trying to create structural transformation. That's really the spirit of this conference. So I hope that we have a fruitful dialogue. And not thinking, we had to do a short title, but the longer title, it wouldn't just be refugees, but also forced migrants. Because a lot of people are forced to leave because of the crisis of neoliberalism and the security crisis, but they don't necessarily fit the legal definition of a refugee. That's an important part of the conference as well, forced migrants. In fact, the work of Dr. Raul Delgado-Wise was instrumental in helping us kind of think out the link between neoliberalism and forced migration. So those are some of the themes that we'll be talking about throughout the conference. So with no further ado, we'll get started with our first panel, and I'd like to bring up a wonderful professor who everyone loves, and if you don't love Nestor Rodriguez, something's wrong with you. This is one of the most esteemed colleagues here, Dr. Nestor Rodriguez, who's the author of U.S. Guatemalan Migration, a book that he just published in 2014 with Dr. Susana Jonas. And Nestor, it's a pleasure to have you moderate this first panel.
Okay, let's just get right down to the panel because this is very important people bringing very important information. So as I call out your names, will you please come and take your seat here for this plenary panel called Neoliberalism, Forced Migration, and Mesoamerican Refugees. And I'll just go down to participants. Dawn Pauly, is Dawn Pauly here? Great. She's a doctoral student at the Autonomous University of Puebla in Mexico. And the title of her presentation is Drug War, Capitalism in Central America, Investment, Promotion, and Security Funding as Structural Causes of Migration. The next participant will be, I don't think Doctora Julieta Castellanos is here. No. No? Okay. We're going to have Alex Sanchez from Jumis Unidos in LA. Thank you very much. Next we have Doctora Cecilia Menjiva coming to us from the University of Kansas. And the title of her presentation is there a role for academics in the support of Central American refugees? And then we have Agustin Estrada Negrete. He is with the International Center, all of them. And the title of his presentation is Los Refugiados Políticos en el Contexto Neoliberal. Experiencia Personal, Caso Estadounidense. 20 minutos y yo les paso la tarjeta cuando está pasando el tiempo, ¿ok?
¿Quién va primero?
So, why don't we take la orden del...
Bueno. Okay. I guess I should speak in That was fast. A quick transition. So thank you very much, everyone. It's a huge honor to be in Austin. It's my first time in Austin, and I was really happy to get this invitation, and I'm happy to see what feels like a mix of folks here from students and professors and different walks of life, I guess. I also wanted to thank Paloma very much for all of her help. She's been amazing over the past few months. Obviously, Benson for bringing us, and also thank you to all the people who are doing interpretation. So, as mentioned, my name is Dawn Paley. I am a journalist by training. I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada, and I wrote a book called Drug War, Capitalism. And as folks know, the title of the conference is Derechos en Crisis, Refugees, Migrant Detention, and Authoritarian Neoliberalism. I'm super excited over the next couple days to learn a lot about the refugees and the migrant detention part, because it's something I know way less about. And I think, I don't know, I kind of assume my role here is to talk about the authoritarian neoliberalism piece. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that a little bit in the context of Central America. So I don't want to over-determine the U.S. role in the current crisis, the ongoing crisis in Central America, but honestly it seems hard not to. There are obviously many local factors to what is going on in Central America, the structural causes of the expulsion of people from Central America, like elites who refuse to pay taxes and high levels of state corruption. But I think it is important to recognize that the crisis of refugees, of violence, and extreme inequality in Central America, that crisis, the roots of that crisis are here in the United States, or in United States policies. The roots are in the U.S. military intervention in Honduras in 1924, and Washington's support for Central American dictators and militaries during most of the 20th century. The roots are in the United Fruit Company, which built its own railways and controlled huge swaths of land in Central America, refusing to pay taxes. For decades, United Fruit had more power in the region than anyone else, and the full backing of the U.S. government. The roots are in the U.S.-backed coup in Guatemala in 1954, an event which would create the conditions for the country's 36-year internal conflict. The roots are in the estimated $9 billion of military aid to repressive regimes in Central America in the 1980s, regimes that massacred and disappeared hundreds of thousands of people and turned many more into refugees. The roots are in the austerity and privatization that accompanied the peace processes in Central America, promoted by the International Monetary Fund and others. In Guatemala, for example, the peace accords, which were signed in 1996, opened up the country for foreign direct investment in a whole new way. The roots, and I'm talking about the roots of today's crisis, I think all of these things are leading us up to where we are. The roots are in the export of violent street gangs from U.S. prisons. Should I stand up? I just realized, should I stand at the podium or am I okay?
It's your decision.
I feel?
Yeah.
How do people feel? I'm okay? Like this?
Standing
I should stand?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just finding it a little bit like uncomfortable here. I just realized that I'm like, wait, I could just change the structural conditions of my okay, this is better actually.
The live stream is there.
Okay, hi live stream. So I'm just going through some of the roots. This feels a lot better now. I feel like I can see people. So the roots of this crisis are in the export of street gangs from U.S. prisons to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala because of Bill Clinton's policy of double punishment. The roots are in the Obama administration's blind eye and later his administration's support of the 2009 coup d'etat in Honduras. And I don't think the impact of that coup can be underestimated when we're talking about Central America today. Now obviously I just went pretty quick through a bunch of stuff and I changed locations as well. But I wanted to just put out some kind of broad strokes, some big ideas in terms of the deadly roots of U.S. assistance, U.S. aid to Central America over the last century. So I work more on the drug war, and I'm going to focus the presentation on the last 10 years or so and the new discourse that has justified U.S. intervention in Central America, and that is the war on drugs. So in Central America, the main vehicle for U.S. drug war policy has been the Central American Regional Security Initiative. This is since 2010. Now, originally, the Central America Regional Security Initiative, which is also called CARSI, was part of the Merida Initiative. The Merida Initiative is a U.S. drug war program in Mexico. The Merida Initiative is based on Plan Colombia. So first you have Plan Colombia in 2000, then you have the Merida Initiative, which is kicking off about 2008, and CARSI, the Central America Specific Initiative, splits off in 2010. So in Central America, CARSI has been the vehicle for what I have called drug war capitalism. And I wanted to briefly outline what I mean by drug war capitalism. Basically, the gist, the elevator pitch version of drug war capitalism is that U.S. comprehensive drug war policy, enshrined in Plan Colombia, enshrined in the Merida Initiative, enshrined in CARSI, is actually not primarily about drugs. That these policies, their main point, their main reason of being, is not about drugs. Rather, these plans respond to the interests of transnational capital. In other words, what these plans do is they help introduce and safeguard authoritarian neoliberalism. So how does this work? Like, I feel like it's kind of a leap sometimes to go from like Carsi and the Merida Initiative to authoritarian neoliberalism in the same breath. In order to break down the main ideas in the book that I wrote, which is called Drug War Capitalism, I usually talk about the 3 Ps of U.S. anti-drug policy south of the U.S.-Mexico border. The 3 Ps are policy, police, and paramilitaries. Policy. This is the least sexy and the least talked about probably element of these plans, but I think that it's actually an essential element. One of the key innovations of Plan Colombia was to carry out a transformation of the legal system and a series of policy reforms to encourage foreign direct investment and prepare the country for signing a free trade agreement with the United States. So while Plan Colombia was happening, the Colombian government and the US government were not saying, we're doing this to change your laws, to change your legal system, and to get the country ready for a free trade agreement with the US. Interestingly, they admitted it after, though. So once Plan Colombia had officially ended the first phase of it in 2006, there was this discussion happening among policymakers basically in Washington going, I don't know, we didn't really stop the flow of cocaine. And the backers, the defenders of Plan Colombia were basically going, but we did so much other great stuff. We changed the legal system. They copied it, made a copy of basically the US legal system, which is now what they've done in Mexico as well, and changed a bunch of regulations to provide more security for investors. So on the surface, these policy elements have nothing to do with drug trafficking. They're totally about neoliberalism. They're totally about deepening neoliberalism and about extending structural guarantees to capital in terms of making investments in host economies. But they are an essential part of these plans. Like, it's when you go through what Plan Colombia is, when you go through what the Merida Initiative is, it's all about, there's always a section about the rule of law, and what that has meant in Colombia and in Mexico has been a transformation of the host legal systems in both countries. The policy piece, again, like, it's not the most newspaper-friendly part of these anti-drug wars, but it's like an essential piece where you go, wait, something else is going on here that's not just about, this is not just about cocaine. The winners of these policy changes are transnational corporations, the oil giants, the big mining companies, the retail giants, the manufacturing sector. In Mexico, and hopefully we'll be able to speak about this more in other sessions, the amount of reforms that have been passed while the country is being terrorized by the violence of the drug war has been incredible. Labor reform, tax reform, telecommunications reform, energy reform is probably the most crucial. Similarly, Colombia's national oil company was also privatized during Plan Colombia. And actually, the new plan in Central America, which is something I want to talk about just to end off here, is called the Alliance for Prosperity. It's very obvious in that plan, in the Alliance for Prosperity, that there's a lot going on the policy level with the Alliance for Prosperity that has to do with creating the conditions for investment. But I want to get to the Alliance for Prosperity in just a minute. So the first P of drug war capitalism is policy. All these policy changes are happening, some of them funded directly by the US government under the rubric of whatever plan it is, Plan Colombia, the Merida Initiative, CARSI, others happening simultaneously while populations of these different countries are being terrorized by other elements, the other 2 Ps basically, police and paramilitaries. So the policing piece is probably the most obvious form of US involvement or what the drug war means. In Mexico, it's the Policía Federal, whose numbers went from around 4,000 when Felipe Calderón declared the war on drugs in December of 2006 to over 40,000 today. This is a highly militarized police force. They wear balaclavas, they ride around, or ski masks, I believe you call them. They ride around in the back of trucks, carry automatic weapons. All of them receive at least 1 year of military training. So a highly militarized police force that has jurisdiction over other areas that local police and municipal police could not work in, and being deployed all around the country. So the official story is that there's going to be these new well-paid, well-trained, uncorrupt security forces that are going to fight drug trafficking. But we do know that there's been one study that's come out, of a statistical analysis showing that where federal police have been deployed in joint operations with soldiers, there has been in 11 out of 12 cases an increase in homicides in those areas. So a direct link between the mobilization of the federal police in Mexico and an increase in violence. And I think that's another piece that we need to talk about. Certainly with Ayotzinapa in Mexico, it was like Fue el Estado became the cry of many people denouncing what was happening in Guerrero state, but it's not obviously just Guerrero, it's actually throughout Mexico that you have state forces and specifically militarized forces responsible for some of the worst crimes. In Honduras, you have the Tigres, and if you are curious about the Tigres, the Wall Street Journal just put out a video. It's a 3-minute long video. They embedded with the Tigres, and they basically, it looks like, if you've ever seen like a video of what U.S. troops do in Iraq, that's what they're doing in poor neighborhoods in Tegucigalpa, going and kicking people's doors down, pulling everyone out of the house in the middle of the night, etc., terrorizing people. These are U.S. trained forces, and always, under the, we need Tigres, we need better police officers to stop drug trafficking. Obviously, these forces also play a role in terms of protecting capital. I feel like that's a pretty straightforward argument to make. So these are the same police forces that will guard against strikes, that will prevent, campesinos from making a blockade if need be, clear the road, etc. So they're also structurally providing physical guarantees for the ongoing and actually increased or amplified space occupied by transnational capital throughout Mexico, the extractive industries, for example. And it's actually interesting in the language of the Merida Initiative and CARSI that what authorities talk about doing with the drug trade is that they don't talk about stopping the drug trade, and they don't actually, in Plan Colombia, they talked about reducing the amount of cocaine. In the Merida Initiative and in CARSI in Central America, the actual language they use is disrupt. And so when they disrupt a trafficking route, that means the trafficking route goes somewhere else. And the war expands. And the State Department has admitted over and over again, that they'll say it themselves, like, well, there used to be drug traffickers in this region, and now they're over there because we had success in region A, so now they're in region B. So now we need to go to region B, and then move them into region C, etc. This is what's happening as it has moved. Basically, the U.S. focus has moved from Colombia to Mexico, and now Central America, and also the Caribbean. There's also a Caribbean Basin Regional Security Initiative, a very similar initiative to CARSI. But that moving around of drug trafficking routes is partially where the third P comes in, which is paramilitary. So violence in Mexico, as I'm sure everyone here knows, has experienced a huge increase of homicides, of people who've been disappeared since December of 2006, when the drug war was first declared by Felipe Calderón. So this strategy of disruption, what it did was disrupt in Mexico and in Central America a decades-old business of essentially transporting cocaine and producing and moving opium and marijuana north to the U.S.-Mexico border. The question really, I guess, like the kind of analogy I can think of for what that U.S. strategy of disruption means is it's like kicking a hornet's nest to try to get rid of hornets. That's the kind of solution they're applying. So what they do is they send these new police forces that are supposedly better trained and non-corrupt out to block trafficking routes, to stop the movement of different products, which historically have been moved by other state forces, by other police forces, by the army, etc. And what the people moving the product do is they defend their routes or they defend their business the way they're able to under a system of prohibition, which is using violence. So trafficking routes, which are also called drug cartels, in the U.S. media and in Mexico and the mainstream media, we're always hearing about drug cartels. They essentially became better armed. They armed themselves more and started using new tactics to defend themselves against this technique of disruption funded by the U.S. and host governments. So there's no doubt that the techniques, the tactics used by these paramilitary groups, by these drug cartels, are based in terror, a use of terror against the population. And it's funny because in the US, I feel like sometimes there's this idea that there's terrorist groups, but I think the reality is that most of the times really the terrorist groups are the state. And I think that's why I like the idea, or I propose in my book, that we talk about paramilitaries and not about drug cartels, because what we see is that these groups that are carrying out these actions of terror against the population are also working very closely often with different state forces. And many of them are often retired or sometimes even currently being paid, like defected kind of police officers and etc. So the big example here again is Ayotzinapa. Municipal police officers in Guerrero did not turn the 43 students they arrested in September of 2014 over to a drug gang. They turned them over to a paramilitary group. Paramilitary groups are defined because they're irregular armed forces that work with state forces, and it's very clear that this is what's happening in different parts of Mexico. Drug cartels are not insurgent forces. Their members often come from state ranks, and their activities can actually benefit or be useful to capital. And this is where we have some hindsight from Colombia. It's extremely useful in terms of understanding these dynamics. In Colombia, we know that drug-financed paramilitary groups patrolled with the army, they supported Congress people, they eliminated union members, and they cleared territory for transnational corporations, the banana companies Chiquita and Dole, Coca-Cola, the oil giant BP, the mining companies Drummond, and so on. So we know that there can be a symbiotic relationship between these paramilitary groups and transnational, the biggest, most powerful capitalists, essentially, the big ones. So that's basically my summary of drug war capitalism. The challenge is to think about the drug war and not, like people often at my university in Puebla will say, oh, you work on like the drug cartels and the narcos and stuff, and I'm like, no, I work on the state, like it's really state policy that I'm talking about. When we talk about the increase in violence in Mexico, it's making the link back to US policy. It's making the link back to this, what the Mexican state is doing. Violence did not surge out of nowhere. It is caused by and also a response to state policy. So I'm going to go through really quickly a couple of things just to put it out there on the Alliance for Prosperity, because it's something that people are talking about in the context of Central America, and honestly I've not heard enough critical voices on the Alliance for Prosperity. Folks might know the US just designated $750 million towards their strategy for engagement in Central America this year. And that's going to mean the continuation of CARSI, which I mentioned, the drug war plan, and also something called the Alliance for Prosperity. The Alliance for Prosperity was supposedly written by the presidents of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. It's going to be a big $22 billion plan, and what Washington is claiming is that this is the plan that is going to solve the migrant crisis, it's going to solve the structural causes, people are going to stop coming up to the United States, because the Alliance for Prosperity is going to create all of these jobs. The Alliance for Prosperity is Plan Puebla Panama. That's what it is. It is the same highway projects, the same elite, tapping into certain regions, and mainly it's actually a large gas pipeline that will go from Salina Cruz, Oaxaca, to Escuintla, Guatemala, that is going to provide a market for many, I'm sure many Texan corporations to have somewhere to sell their natural gas, which they are having a very hard time doing right now. So really the Alliance for Prosperity is a plan to deepen neoliberalism, deepen neoliberal capitalism in Central America, even more, promote more economic integration. And we're seeing this overlaid. I mean, the Alliance for Prosperity has a security component, and CARSI is going on at the same time. So what it is essentially like just pushing down more on Central America, pushing more neoliberalism, and through the drug war, unfortunately pushing more violence. So I'm ending now, I'm getting the 0-minute sign. What they're telling us is that the Alliance for Prosperity is going to stem the migration of people and families from Central America. And I think what is our task over the next couple of days and over the next many, many years is to counter that discourse in a meaningful way, really challenge it and push back. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists on how they're doing that. Thank
Okay. But in reality, you know, where you left off is where I should begin. It's this Alliance for Prosperity and the $700 million that are going to be allocated over there are being sold as a way to reduce the gang violence that have perpetrated throughout Central America. And they're selling it also as prevention and intervention programming that's going to be developed throughout Central America to address the issue of why youth get into gangs, but also how to have reentry programs. And that's the way they're selling it. But the large percentage of those funds are going to be used for repression. They are going to be used to continue the initiatives, you know, for large corporations to be able to continue their investment in the revitalization of El Salvador, in one case, and Central America. But in El Salvador's case, primarily, there's been this sense of redevelopment throughout the country, what I call the gentrification of a country, you know, in which are pushing our low impoverished communities, people out of Central America into that cash flow of export that is the biggest money-making machine, which is people. That's the #1 export of our Central America, because those are what the folks maintain those countries, meaning that those people, once they get to the United States, they start making those countries run through the remittances that they send back, which is critical because those monies are going back to those rich folks now, especially in El Salvador, where, you know, the colon was dollarized, right? We have Washington, D.C. controlling the economy down there. So it is clear that, you know, these initiatives have no sense of clear vision in regards to how they're going to reduce violence. Not only by the gang problem, which is what they say is primarily causing the mass flow of unaccompanied minors coming up, but also the general violence and criminality that exists already in El Salvador. We got to understand one thing clear, though, that the gangs not necessarily were exported down to Central America. Violence and gangs already existed in Central America. Gang members that were deported down to Central America were individuals that have been criminalized here as young men and women. We're talking about the mass incarceration, which is also making millions for those corporations that are running the criminal industrial complex, and also the privatized prisons that are now taking over many of those facilities in other states because of the mass incarceration. Now, there is a big talk, even President Obama spoke on the issue of that needs to change. And it needs to change. In California, we have Proposition 47 passed by the voters, which basically reduces some felony convictions to misdemeanors. But it doesn't underline the factors in which many people continue to be incarcerated. And that is impoverished community, lack of social services, lack of interest to really redevelop communities where it can keep the families in those communities and prosper out of poverty. Instead, they're being pushed away to other communities, which in so is also expanding the issue of youth violence. You know, now we have one of the main gangs that's widely known, Mara Salvatrucha, in many states throughout the country. That wasn't a tactic or a strategy, internal strategy of the gang. It wasn't their intention to expand and become a super gang. It was their survival due to policies that had been enacted towards them. You know, and starting with the gang injunctions, which in Los Angeles has become the primary tool to use to get rid of gangs in particular neighborhoods. You know, by them implementing those gang injunctions means that law enforcement has continued right to harass individuals based on the color of their skin, based on them being a certain criteria, based on being a young male in the community, based on the geography of where you work, of where you live in, and the continued harassment and incarceration for a year at a time, in which they come back out and continue the cycle of this mass incarceration tool that's being used now. The federal government has come after and used a similar tool, which is the RICO. The RICO Act was introduced in the 60s and 70s, and used primarily to go after organized crime structures such as the Italian mafia. But now it's being used primarily to go after gangs. It's being used primarily to go and incarcerate individuals that are not hiding the fact that they belong to a gang. Actually, they want their gang to be noticed, differently from any organized crime structures that want to become secretive and make millions and millions out of funds. Gang members are not like that. They're street, they want to have recognition, they want to show territory and control. And it's easily to prosecute a gang because they have already admitted they're part of the gang. The government, all it has to do is put the different components that crimes have been committed on behalf of the corporation, and that basically makes it a federal crime, which is easily done. Wiretaps, they have the freedom to use wiretap and other tools in law enforcement that typically they wouldn't be able to use. So I consider the RICO Act the new gang injunction by the federal government to get rid of people easily tracking, putting them through the criminal justice system. I think that all of these policies that have been used in order to mass incarcerate and mass deport people, like the 1996 Anti-Terrorist Act laws and the IRA, that basically it was the stepping stone in basically deporting mass quantities of people that have been criminalized. Individuals that could had not had committed a crime in 10, 20 years now fell under that bracket of being put in deportation proceedings, even if they were here legally, have been a resident for a long time, or even served in the military for that matter. Now, these individuals were deportable based on that law that continues to this day be used to go after individuals that have been criminalized. Now, we have to go back a little and understand, why all these youth are fleeing now. All these youth in Central America are coming up, as we were hearing earlier by Professor Alfonso Gonzalez, is that this is nothing new to us. This has been an ongoing systematic, refuge of young kids fleeing a impoverished, dangerous environment that they have been growing up in way before the Civil War. I was one of those unaccompanied minors in 1979. I was left behind by my parents at age 3 and my little brother at a year and a half. 5 years later, total strangers came and told us that they were going to go and reunite us with our families, with our real biological parents. And we came on this journey as unaccompanied minors, me being 7 years old and my brother 5. And we came through Mexico. It wasn't as bad as it was now, but I remember peeing in my pants from being afraid. I remember being threatened if I wouldn't recognize them or that couple that was bringing me as my father and my mother. I was totally and forever be separated from my real parents if I didn't say those words, if we were stopped. And then we did get stopped at the border. And I say, El and Ea, their mom and dad, right? Because I knew that if I didn't say that, I was going to be separated forever. Who knows what I will be now? But that was just a stepping stone. To go into a community with these people you don't know and see the exchange taking place between two people, and money being exchanged for your release into those hands of those people, and you're now with those people that are presumably are your parents, and you don't know them. You do not know those parents anymore because you have been so separated from them for so long. My brother and I were holding hands, not knowing we were sold. There's no difference to what's going on today. It's no different. I'm working with unaccompanied minors in Los Angeles because they're fleeing not only the gang violence, which is typically, what is being scapegoated as, but they're fleeing poverty. They're being sent because of this fear of this violence. They're being sent down to come up by their parents. Many of them didn't even want to leave. but some of them had real clear issues and fears of the gang problem, but also many of them had expressed how many times they were beaten by law enforcement, how many times they had to run away from them. But most recently, many of them that run now, that are not gang members, are being shot by authority down there, especially in El Salvador right now, by the military that's out there, and also that's out in the community, trying to put a dent in this violence, but also by the National Civil Police. Every day that I meet with these kids in the schools in which I work in, they're telling me, my cousin got killed yesterday. 3 of my friends were executed by the military. My mom is being threatened with the extortion money of a gang. We have business people that have come and called me trying to see if there's a way to fix an extortion problem, in which I tried, and it so happened that the gangs denied trying to extort this business person. And it goes to show that, you know, the gangs are not doing all the extortion, because this gentleman came back to me and said, forget about it, Alex. We found out it was my brother-in-law that was doing that and his own sister. He was passing himself by a gang member. So we're seeing that people are taking advantage of a clear demonized population, which is a gang member. Once you use the word gang, nobody wants to help. Once you use the word gang, nobody wants to be involved with it or associated with it. So everything falls on that title. So instead of using gangs, why don't we say criminalized individuals, right? Because that's who they are. We see them being criminalized as soon as they come. I see this young man right now who came, that everybody's worried about the issues of reunifying with their family, which is important. The issue of legal representation in their immigration court is extremely important. And the issue of mental health, that is critical. Some of these kids have real health problems because of the trauma that they witness in their countries. They tell their stories in their healing circles in a way that it's a story that they're telling about somebody else. No emotion. They're placing themselves out of those stories they tell. And they're pushing people away. Our focus is not on those 3 issues, those 3 needed support and services. Our issue is what happens to them once they come into our communities. What happens once they get enrolled in the school? What happens once they go into those communities which has gangs, has violence, has drugs, prostitution, massive poverty? What happens after they reunify with family members they haven't seen in 13, 15 years? How's that relationship? Now, a small percentage of them are having a hard time. That's the population that I'm working with that small percentage of them. Their lack of interest in their education is 0. They're telling us, I came to the United States to work, not to go to school. There's no interest in their academia because they don't understand the material. There's so many of them now that the schools don't know what to do. And then LAUSD is a huge, huge school district. And when we first brought it up to many other schools in the area, that we needed to set something up when these kids came into the school district, they said, oh no, we've dealt with ESL school kids before. Then, months later, we're getting a call. Alex, look, I sent some pictures over to you by phone. Tell me what they are. Yeah, I saw them. I said, well, what's 503? I said, well, you're in trouble now. Because remember, when these kids are fleeing and they're coming here, they're coming to an environment that's totally alienated. They're isolated. They're alone. They don't have their friends. And the family, they just got to know. Their little brothers that were born here don't even speak Spanish or want to. Step-parents, stepmothers become an issue. You become an issue. Another mouth to feed. Already in a impoverished home. All those issues come into play. Nobody's working on those topics. So what happened was this kid goes to the school and has to deal with other kids that are listening to what Trump is saying, other kids that are discriminatory towards another class. I mean, these kids already been victims of violence in those communities in South Central LA. They're already being jacked. They're having this other perspective of what an African American is because they're already falling victim of it, either by robberies or putting guns to their heads and taking their stuff. These kids are seeking how to feel protected. And they already been knowing that the gangs can provide that. They already been knowing that those specific, the gangs provide that protection. It provides a unity, it provides camaraderie, you know. It provides what they need at that moment. So it's not difficult for them to all of a sudden start writing something that's related to them culturally. You know, like 503, which is the Salvadorian national, international area, phone area code. Right? The teachers didn't know this. But they have already developed a group in which they have similar issues, similar cultural connection within that group to protect themselves from other groups outside in the playground. So we've been working with those kids. Not only have we been working with them to try to help them deal and integrate, you know, with the what's happening around their community, but also not to fall victims. You know, how to survive within a system that's been already put up against them. But how have they been survivors of the violence already that they've already experienced? And probably these kids in this school will never even come close. But how can we not intervene with these kids if we know that one thing can tick them off over the edge and they already have experienced violence? So we have a crisis that one part is coming here and overwhelming the government, you know, and putting them in homes and whatnot. But the other crisis will be, how will these kids incorporate themselves into our communities? How are we going to put in programs in place that will intervene from these kids not becoming criminalized and fall into the criminal justice system and mass incarceration and then deportation, and they become another statistic? Because that's what happened to me. I was deported in 1994 after becoming a member of a gang. After I was seeking that attention, after I was seeking that protection that nobody gave me, I didn't feel safe. And we cannot make that same mistake that was done in the 80s be the mistake that we're doing now. We cannot just focus on trying to change a system elsewhere or a specific services, but how can we stop our kids from falling through the cracks in our community? And it's all about looking at these initiatives that we're talking about. How are our governments in Central America be held accountable? We need them to be held accountable of why they're exporting our people and putting our children in danger. There needs to be a stop to that, and I think that that's the key. It's not about immigration reform. Most of us and most of these kids will never want to come to this country. It's about how do we hold those countries accountable to provide the necessary means in a humane way for people to stay and prosper in those countries. That will stop the immigration problem. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the organizers for having invited me to share these thoughts with you. The question that was posed to me was whether there is a role for academics in these
refugee crisis in support of the Central Americans seeking refuge, and in particular in support of the Central American women and children who are being held in deportation. And of course, from my view, it's a resounding yes. Of course, there is a role the academics not only can play in this, but should play in this. So I'm going to share just a couple of thoughts with you regarding this, my position in this. But I want to tell you just a little bit of what I've been doing so that you know why I'm reflecting the way I'm reflecting about this. I've been providing pro bono expert witnessing testimonies for the Central American women who are being held in detention here in Texas mostly. I also provided some testimony when Salvadorians were also being held in detention when they were seeking political asylum. So this has been going on for a while, like I think Alfonso mentioned initially. But now, since 2014, this has been sort of like an avalanche of requests for this kind of support. So first, I want to mention that there is at this particular historical point, I am being able to provide this kind of testimony based on research that I've done on gender-based violence in Central America. In the past, it was a different kind of testimony that I provided. And so I want to emphasize that things change. It's the role of academics in this crisis or in these events that become disastrous can evolve and change. We don't always stay the same. Also, the work that I've done is only one tiny slice from a wide range of roles that we can take. But this is what I've chosen to do, and this is given the work that I've done. So I think, of course, we fundamentally think, I think we, our work, the research work that we do, our scholarly work, should enable us to contribute to changing the conditions in which the populations we study live. In this case, through the legal strategies that can aid the women and children in detention. Let me elaborate on this point by making use of a lens that, as a sociologist, as a trained sociologist, I have come to know well. I'm talking here about public sociology. Some of you may not agree with this, but this is the lens that I'm using to understand the work that I'm doing right now. This framework helps me reflect on this rather huge task of changing the conditions of life for the populations that I study, that I care about. And what I'm going to comment on here is just one way of doing public sociology. So there are different ways of doing public sociology. For instance, one way of doing so is by writing an op-ed piece, by actively protesting, or even through teaching in a way that helps our students understand how structural and historical forces have shaped their lives and their place in the world today. But in Michael Buraboy's call to return to a public sociology, he made an impassioned appeal for a return to what he calls an organic public sociology. In his words, this is a sociology in which the sociologist works in close connection with a visible, thick, active local public, such as faith communities, the labor movement, and those who advocate for immigrant rights. So in the work that I have been doing for the Central American women, I think I have been pretty directly following Buraboy's call in that I have decided to put my research to work for immigrant rights and to work with the volunteer lawyers who are so incredibly dedicated. Some of them are in this room right now. And I have to thank them also for helping me translate my research into what the judges and government lawyers might understand or may choose not to understand. But yeah, because that's often the case. But the lawyers I have worked with have led by example, and I really want to thank them for training me in how to do this. In order to do public sociology well, Douglas Massey, another sociologist, argues, one has to have an accurate understanding of the groups and structures one seeks to modify through action. In order to be effective, one has to first produce research and knowledge that is sound and well done. In my case, I have been doing work on Central American migration to the United States. But I also have done work in Central America on violence, and I happen to write a book on gender violence in Guatemala. And so as a result of that, I have been able to draw from that work directly and provide testimony based on that work. At the time I did the research, and when I wrote that book, I had no idea I would be using this work in the cases that where I've been using this research. I had no idea that I would be trying to explain to judges the conditions that I depict in the book, but it's also the conditions that the women who are detained have fled. Little did I know at that time that I would be using the actual content of my research in a much more direct way, like the cases in which I have served. I had no idea that I would be explaining in court to judges my depictions of gender violence in the 3 countries of the Central American Northern Triangle. That, for instance, chapter 4, which is on marriages in the private sphere, or chapter 5, which deals with experiences in the labor force, would actually be entered as exhibits in court. I had no idea that would happen, but that's what's happening now. Some scholars, I should also say, oppose this view. Not everybody agrees, of course, with my position. Some scholars who are comprometidos, who are dedicated to the lives of Central American immigrants and who also advocate for their rights, don't agree necessarily with, for instance, providing testimony in court for in support of the asylum cases for the Central American women, because they argue that in doing so we portray the cultures from where the women come from in such a way that it essentializes the cultures and it presents them as in a cartoonish kind of way. But I have kept this in mind, and I have tried my best not to do that. So I have tried not to portray the culture. I never use the word culture in my declarations. That the immigrants come from as inherently violent, or the men as simply machistas or culturally inclined to be violent, because that's not how I depict them in my research. And so I have stayed true to my work and portrayed country conditions in the same way I depict them in my own work. I have situated the everyday lives of women within the broader structural conditions and profound multiple inequalities in their lives and institutional violence that they experience in their home countries, without individualizing experiences of violence. I find this to be satisfying personally, because it's my work that I've been able to use to do this, but also because it avoids these arguments about these women coming from violent cultures, which is something that I have really tried to fight. and it's also very gratifying when a judge seems to understand what I'm talking about. And so that, one judge said that I had educated him about the conditions. And so I think that, so for me, it's allowed me to explain, with the help of the lawyers, aspects of my work that I didn't think were of any interest, really, beyond the academy. And so this portrayal of how I do my testimony have allowed me to explain in the courtroom conditions that have allowed me to explain how, for instance, institutionally and at the level of government, governments have been unable and or unwilling to provide protection for the women. If I individualize my depictions, then that takes me away from a more institutional and broader explanation of the conditions that the women live. But very importantly, this work has gone both ways. The public sociology that I seek to follow is also very reflexive, meaning that it addresses issues of value and general purpose. It is a sociology bound to civil society, to the huge array of associations and movements that stand apart from the state and the economy. As such, as Michael Borboy argues, it is sociology that represents the interests of humanity, very plainly put. It is a sociology, or a position better, that entails rethinking our relationship to the university, to all the disciplines, to the people who participate in our studies, and also in how we train our students. It really involves a rethinking of our place in relation to the work we do. So I would like to emphasize that the effects, again, are both ways. Not only me putting to work my research, what I think it should be placed at this particular moment, but also how participating in these acts through providing expert testimony, providing declarations to help in specific cases, providing testimonies in court, have impacted me as well, personally, but also as a researcher, as an academic, and I think I have acquired a new level of responsibility in doing the work that I'm doing. So, for instance, one question that that keeps on coming up when I'm testifying from the government council is that the 3 countries of the Northern Triangle have passed all these laws to protect women. So the governments are willing and able, probably, to protect the women who are fleeing and seeking protection here. So that question really has stayed with me, and now with my collaborator Shannon Drysdale Walsh, we have been writing papers. These are going to be research publications, examining why each of these 3 countries. We actually have 3 papers, one for each country. Why has Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras passed this battery of laws that are absolutely inefficient and never applied on the ground? So at the same time that I'm putting my research to some service, the very act of participating in this way is affecting, is guiding me in different research paths. So at this point, I think it's not only possible to just accumulate knowledge and not put it to use. I don't think this is no longer an option. This is a responsibility that we have. I have seen the potential of using research to change even one life. Serving as an expert witness has been a transformative effect on me as a researcher and personally. I have gained a responsibility because through my testimony, I have learned about the immense power of the state and through its laws. I have learned and have become even more cognizant about the immense power of the law, the state, as many immigrants I have interviewed through my other research often have reminded me. And I'm just going to give one more example of this immense power of the law that I knew it was there before, but through the work that I'm doing, it's become even more apparent. Two instances. One is, of course, going to visit a detention center in Eloy, Arizona. It's just the physicality of the power of the state is incredible. Going through 3 outside gates or fences, but with codes to enter each, and then going inside through a metal detector, and going again through 3 more doors where I was accompanied by a guard from each door to the next. So altogether, 6 secured gates to get to the courtroom inside Eloy. And at each time I entered these sort of layers of power, I felt like it's becoming smaller and smaller, because by the time I entered the courtroom, I couldn't even bring a pencil or a piece of paper to write on, or anything. So that it brings it, the physicality of it brings it really immediate for me. And the other time was one I was testifying over the telephone, and I was at home in the privacy of my own home. No one was around. I was in my home office, and the judge, before you testify, you're supposed to raise your right hand. No one was in the room with me. No one. There were no cameras. Nothing. The judge asked me to raise my right hand. I did, and nobody was watching me. And I kept it up, and then she said, now you can put your hand down, and I did. And after that, I thought, what just happened? This is, and this is me in my home, and just imagine what happens to the people who go through the system and must confront not just raising your right hand and putting it down, that's nothing, but the chains, the chain forms that they're placed in, how they must feel the power of the state and the law and the detention center. So that's all I wanted to share with you for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos, yo soy Agustín Estrada Negrete. Pues yo soy un asilado político y vengo a contarles mi testimonio. Primero que nada, decirles por qué soy asilado político. En México yo era maestro, era director de una escuela de educación especial. Era también un defensor de los derechos de los niños pobres, de los niños discapacitados. Y me movía en el Congreso del Estado de México, empujando leyes para tratar de modificar todas las arbitrariedades y toda la violación a los derechos humanos que se viven en México. También fui amante del presidente que es actualmente en México, Enrique Peña Nieto, y soy el único testigo que queda vivo sobre el asesinato que él hizo porque él mató a su esposa. Pero de eso no vamos a hablar ahora. Vamos a hablar del proceso de asilo político y vamos a hablar también de cómo se criminaliza también aquí en los Estados Unidos a los inmigrantes, lo cual no lo podemos permitir. Durante mi proceso como peticionario de asilo político, yo venía de haber sido criminalizado porque en la cárcel fui encarcelado, fui violado, fui torturado, me sacan de mi país, me resucitan primero la Cruz Roja Mexicana y me sacan de mi país una organización de derechos humanos que se llama IDEAS y el Centro Agustín Pro. Después llego aquí a Estados Unidos, pues sobreviviente de tortura, No me sirvió a mí haber sido un profesionista, tener un doctorado. No me sirvió a mí nada de eso. Es decir, fui criminalizado en mi país por ser activista y llego a Estados Unidos y ¿qué creen? Ahora soy criminalizado por ser solicitante de asilo político. Se me da el trato de un criminal. Se me detiene como si fuera un criminal. Se me mete a otra cárcel como si fuera otro criminal y se me da un trato de criminal en nombre de la ley. Cuando eso sucede, a mí en particular me dio mucha tristeza, una situación lamentable, porque los asilados políticos venimos de sufrir una persecución y llegamos a un país a pedir ayuda y en ese país, en vez de ayudarse, se nos da una represión, una criminalización de la inmigración. Después en el centro de detención me encuentro que hay mucha gente que está solicitando asilo político y que lleva mucho tiempo detenida. Ahí esa gente me comenta, ¿sabes qué? En México no están dando, para los mexicanos no están dando asilos políticos. Para México dudo que te lo den. Entonces ese comentario de esa imperativo para México no hay asilo político, a mí me llevó a reflexionar muchas cosas, porque digo, bueno, yo no vine aquí por mi gusto, en mi país yo era profesionista, tenía carro, tenía una bebé que acababa de nacer, yo soy transgénero, pero bueno, también soy papá, y hay muchas cosas que yo tuve que dejar por salvar mi vida. Una organización de repente me despierta la Cruz Roja y me dice, ya no puedes estar aquí, y me sacan del país. Vengo a parar aquí a Estados Unidos y yo digo, bueno, ¿y ahora qué voy a hacer? Bueno, empecé a sufrir todo lo que viene siendo un proceso de criminalización de la inmigración. Me puse entonces a analizar qué es lo que estaba pasando y me di cuenta que aquí en Estados Unidos, en nombre de la seguridad nacional, lo ponen como un pretexto para negar los asilos políticos, condenan a los inmigrantes en nombre de la seguridad social. El sistema judicial de los Estados Unidos siento yo que está prácticamente viciado, está podrido, se puede decir esa palabra, no es funcional. Y también me doy cuenta que el sistema judicial funciona así porque la gente en los Estados Unidos es manipulada. La gente en Estados Unidos se le fabrica todo el tiempo el miedo de que Estados Unidos va a ser destruido, cuando en todos lados, por algunas iniciativas políticas de los Estados Unidos, se está destruyendo a otros países, se está creando pobreza en otros países y eso genera la emigración forzada. Entonces, hay muchas cosas que parecen tan ridículas que es muy importante que la universidad se hable de estos temas para que los estudiantes, los maestros, construyan una sociedad diferente, un tejido social diferente y se vaya poco a poco eliminando esta situación de violación a los derechos humanos. Yo no creo que sea una crisis de derechos. El nuevo sistema neoliberal capitalista, que bueno, ya tiene muchos años aquí en Estados Unidos, es su historia prácticamente, pero el actual sistema, quienes lo están llevando, en el grupo, en el poder, lo que está buscando es ir modificando los derechos humanos, así como se modifican los valores. Max Schiller, un escritor alemán, él comentaba que los valores se van modificando y otros se perpetúan. Entonces, en los derechos humanos está pasando lo mismo. Lo que antes era un derecho a la inmigración, un derecho al asilo político, ahora te dicen, ¿sabes qué? Ya no tienes ese derecho. Ahora eres criminal porque ya lo cambié. Ajá, y entonces te dan todo ese trato que se da a un criminal. Posteriormente a eso, después de pasar todo ese proceso de vivir en la calle, de ir a buscar shelters, porque yo aquí no tengo familia, me encuentro con la situación que tampoco podía entrar a los shelters. En uno que porque no era drogadicto, en otro porque no era mujer, en otro porque no había estado en la cárcel por delincuencia, en la otra porque no era militar y no podía entrar a ningún shelter. Entonces, pues bueno, el parque me esperó. Pero en esa lucha, en esa vivencia en el parque, en las calles, al ser homeless, conocí a mucha gente y me enteré de las problemáticas que estaba viviendo la gente, que la gente estaba siendo deportada, que en esta administración era donde más se estaba deportando a las personas y que había mucha gente que tenía mucho miedo. Entonces lo que yo hice fue empezar a visitar los centros de detención. Como yo estuve detenido siendo inocente, tanto en México como aquí en Estados Unidos, en el centro de detención, porque yo soy solicitante de asilo político, no tienen por qué meter a los asilados políticos en un centro de detención. Un oficial de asilo político, un oficial de deportación, sin ninguna prueba, sin ningún elemento, dice, yo te pongo una fianza de $12,000, de $15,000, de $8,000. Y uno dice, oye, ¿qué te pasa? ¿En qué te estás basando para multar a alguien? Porque yo soy la autoridad. Tenemos oficiales de deportación que solo por ladrar como perro, actuar que son malditos, son malvados, dicen, porque yo soy la ley y si yo quiero te dejo salir. Y uno dice, lo que faltaba, la injusticia, la impunidad en su totalidad. ¿Cómo puede ser posible? Me llamaba a mí la atención que recientemente, el año pasado, cuando Obama sacó un apoyo para las familias migrantes, que yo no le veo la verdad apoyo porque no les ayuda a obtener una seguridad en este país, una juez dice, ¿sabes qué? No te lo acepto. Y entonces resulta ser que un juez no puede rebatirle la multa que impone un oficial de asilo de deportación. Dice que él no tiene la autoridad suficiente. Y yo dice, caray, ¿cómo si tiene autoridad un juez para decir al presidente que no, pero no le puede decir al oficial de deportación tampoco que no? Entonces, estamos ante un sistema corrupto donde los jueces dan decisiones conforme se los piden, conforme a un sentido político, a un Estado de Derecho que responde a un interés político, a un interés de poder. Entonces, yo lo que hago, lo que pueda voy a ayudar a mis amigos que están adentro y a los que no lo son. Me doy cuenta de que hay muchas injusticias, empiezo a tocar puertas para tratar de buscar abogados pro bono que me ayuden a sacar a la gente que está en la detención. Y bueno, me dicen muchas organizaciones pro bono, ¿sabes qué? Como esta persona está detenida en el centro, California, nosotros solamente defendemos a la gente en San Diego, entonces no los podemos ayudar. Los abogados, yo fui pro bono, pero ahora ya no, porque solamente era abogado pasante o estaba por hacer su examen de abogacía en la barra y entonces necesitaba agarrar experiencia y ahorita ya no hago trabajos pro bono. Entonces no había quien los ayudara. Lo que yo hice solamente fue lo que hacía con los niños en las aulas antes de ser director, enseñarlos a pensar, enseñarlos a defenderse y traerles todas las pruebas que pudieran para defenderse del juez. Pero la arbitrariedad continuaba. Entonces, ¿qué es a lo que voy? Yo quisiera, sobre todo, que como sociedad contemporánea, sociedad de nuestros días, empezáramos a construir un tejido social que ya tiene muchas raíces históricas en este país, sobre la importancia de defender los derechos humanos internacionales, de pugnar porque se modifiquen esas leyes, pero velar que se lleven las iniciativas a las cámaras y que sean votadas. Que ustedes como ciudadanos, porque yo ahorita soy residente, todavía no puedo votar, que ustedes como ciudadanos se fijen a quién ponen en el poder, porque a la gente que ponen en el poder es la gente que va a construir las leyes con las que los van a gobernar. Y si ustedes no tienen cuidado en eso, todo el tiempo van a ser manipulados, utilizados como sociedad y van a enfrentar esas leyes injustas. A veces los senadores, los diputados o los congresistas, aquí les llaman congresistas, me parece, a los diputados, no saben nada de leyes, pero dicen, yo voy a hacer una ley porque estoy en contra de los asilados políticos, porque ellos vienen a quedarse a nuestro país, ¿no? Un prejuicio, eso es un prejuicio, eso no es una ley. ¿Y qué creen? La vuelven ley. Y de repente estoy en contra y bueno, si el niño nació aquí, que el niño se quede, pero a los papás me los echan, ¿no? Y ahora ya es ley eso es un prejuicio, no puede ser una ley. Y sin embargo ya lo impusieron como ley y ahora todos nos tenemos que mover sobre esa ley. Los abogados, la sociedad civil, todo el mundo. Entonces yo les quiero hacer esa atenta invitación que siempre cuando voten vean el perfil de las personas, cuáles y conozcan las leyes, porque además aquí en Estados Unidos se vive una falsa democracia también. O sea, les dicen, estas son las leyes que nosotros hicimos y voten por una o voten por la otra, en cualquiera de las dos les va a ir menos mal y ya quieren a los grupos, hay que apoyar esta porque es en la que nos va a ir menos mal y uno dice, ¿cuál democracia? Así ellos les están poniendo el contenido de la ley y los traen como borregos votando por esa ley. No es posible. Yo quiero pedirles eso, que hay que defender los derechos humanos, que construyamos y cambiemos el Estado de Derecho. Cierro mi participación con esto. Nos volvimos conscientes del derecho a tener derechos y del derecho a pertenecer a algún tipo de comunidad organizada. Solo cuando aparecieron millones de personas que habían perdido dichos derechos y ya no podían recuperarlos. Por eso, lucha, 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 no dejes de luchar por una educación incluyente y social, el pueblo unido y al mundo transformando. Y como decía Carlos Marx en su 11ª tesis, hay que transformar y lo tomamos en la educación, educar para transformar. Muchísimas gracias.
Some minutes left for questions, comments, preguntas, comentarios. Wonderful panel this evening. Tremendos, ¿no?
Oiga, yo sí quiero decirle, quiero responder a Agustín, para empezar, felicidades. Pero la política que acabas de describir, o más bien lo que te pasó, como lo has describido, no es accidente, es la detención prolongada. Todo lo que te hicieron, es yo que he trabajado 25 años en la migración, no como migrant, como abogado. Y desde el principio vimos la detención prolongada que existe con la comunidad mexicana. Y ahorita el crimen mayor que existe es la reentrada ilegal. Y nadie dice nada. Y el problema principal es que cuando hablamos de niños mexicanos, estamos hablando de un abuso que ya se cerró la puerta. Y el reto del sistema es convertir a los centroamericanos en mexicanos. Entonces, ¿por qué están defendiendo nomás a los centroamericanos? Lo merecen. Pero ¿por qué no defienden a los mexicanos igual? Porque ya no hay nada que se puede hacer. Es la reentrada ilegal. Hay un tratado entre México y los Estados Unidos de a los niños violados, huyendo de violencia, que se lo entregan al consulado. Eso es lo que quieren hacer y extender a la comunidad centroamericana. Y como representante y abogado de mexicanos en exilio, invito a que trabaje con nosotros, porque todos los que representamos son derechos humanistas, solamente derechos humanistas, activistas o periodistas. Los que defienden a México, como usted, tenemos que defender. Felicidades.
Hola, muchas gracias a todos los exponentes. Thank you to all the presenters.
para que los demás te escuchen.
Ok, ¿me escuchan? Agustín, no sé si puedes hablar un poquito. Muchas gracias por tu presentación. Creo que la situación de la comunidad transgénero es muy grave y estamos viendo que hay mucha falta de atención, ¿verdad? Inclusive hay poca atención a los centroamericanos, pero toda la atención se está yendo a familias y niños, que es urgente, ¿verdad? Pero se olvida también los jóvenes trans, ¿verdad? Y las mujeres trans. Y estamos viendo el caso de Victoria Arellano en el 2007, ¿verdad? Que murió en detención. Y nada pasó, nada pasó, ¿verdad? Entonces, no sé si puedes hablar un poquito más sobre estos casos que estás viendo y, ¿verdad? Hablar más sobre cómo los abogados pro bono no están haciendo suficiente por esos casos.
Sí, es una situación muy grave la que enfrentan en general las personas LGBT, las transgénero adentro de los centros de detención, pero tiene que ver mucho, por ejemplo, en el caso de los abogados pro bono. Los abogados pro bono dicen, yo tomo un caso si ya tiene la prueba de miedo creíble aprobada, si va a vivir, en el caso de San Diego, en San Diego, si ya no hay nada que hacer, porque prácticamente son casos que están ganados, ¿no? Pero la mayoría de la gente enfrenta lo que viene siendo el problema de la violación de los derechos humanos. Lo que viene siendo los derechos humanos internacionales, el derecho a asilo político es muy claro. Las personas tienen derecho a solicitar asilo político en un país de destino y es en el que esté más próximo a donde fuiste agredido. Entonces, cuando las personas solicitan asilo político, tienen que salir bajo palabra. Sin embargo, las detienen de forma arbitraria porque en este país se ha hecho que el inmigrante es criminal. Es decir, se les da el mismo trato, como ellos ya dijeron, si entraste a este país indocumentado, entonces, ¿qué crees? Ahora ya eres criminal, porque antes no estaba en la figura legal llamarles a los indocumentados criminales. Ahora ya lo hicieron criminal para entonces poder condenar, castigar, prohibir y negar la entrada. Entonces, ¿qué dicen? Bueno, es un solicitante de asilo político, pues le vamos a dar el mismo trato y entonces, aunque él no ha sido deportado, no ha entrado ilegalmente a los Estados Unidos, pero le vamos a dar el mismo proceso, lo vamos a tener, porque no vaya a ser que nos vaya a traer una bomba, no vaya a ser que vaya a hacer explotar cualquier cosa, ¿no? Lo cual es ridículo, porque dentro del proceso de asilo político eres revisado, inspeccionado, te revisan todo, hacen una investigación sobre ti. Entonces, es ridículo que a un solicitante de asilo político lo tengan detenido. La misma ley dice que es bajo palabra, tienen que salir bajo palabra y enfrentar el derecho. Pero aquí ellos tienen como que un candado que le ponen de forma mañosa cuando dicen el oficial de deportación puede fijar la fianza, o te puede detener o te puede negar. Y entonces le dan mucho poder a ese oficial, pero no nada más a ese oficial, también se lo dan a toda la policía en este país. En este país la policía tiene mucha autoridad, más de la que puede tener. Entonces el policía puede matarte, si le caes mal al policía, si quiere te ayuda y si no, no. Como latinos sufrimos todo eso. Cuando yo vivía en la calle, yo fui agredido, golpeado por una persona blanca y el policía a mí no me hizo caso. ¿Y saben por qué? Porque no hablaba bien inglés, porque era mexicano, por todo. Y el policía se fue y me dejó todo sangrado de la cara. Volví a llamar al 911 y el 911 llegó. Y el 911 le dije que el policía que habían mandado me dijo, va a quedar grabado y todo eso. Y entonces me vuelven a mandar al mismo policía. Y los mismos policías dicen, ¿sabes qué? Mejor vete de aquí. En ese entonces yo había ido a parar a San Bernardino, porque San Bernardino es muy peligroso, ¿no? Y, o sea, en vez de que me defiendas, en vez de que me ayudes, me corres, ¿no? Entonces es toda una situación de xenofobia, del odio a la gente, del odio al otro, lo que está imperando. Por eso es muy importante impugnar, derribar esas leyes. Tenemos que construir todo ese tejido social, todo lo que nos lleve a quitarlo, porque no podemos aceptar que el inmigrante sea criminalizado. que la persona que no tiene documentos se le llame criminal y se le someta a un proceso criminal. Eso no es posible.
This question is directed at Don. Could you go deeper into the concept of authoritarian neoliberalism? Like, is it different from earlier forms? And if it is, like, why now? Is it the deeper penetration of
I feel like that question's
capital?
more for Alfonso and Rebecca because they made up the title of the code. And I just took their words. I wouldn't necessarily differentiate. I think.
So is the militarization a response to greater resistance to neoliberalism, or is it more a deeper penetration of transnational capital into Mexico and Central America?
I see it as being both. I think one of the things with the book that I wrote, Drug War Capitalism, is sometimes it's really focused on like the domination part, but that domination is in response to people's organizing and people's life ways, which exist in ways that can overtly challenge capitalism or can subvert it in maybe we could say smaller ways, but very significant ways, like tianguis and different kinds of markets. Migration is an example of that, and so I think that the military strategy has always been like it's the kind of carrot and stick thing, like supposedly bring development, but at the same time have this military and prison criminalization strategy to exercise social control. I guess I don't really see a separation between the two.
Yeah, I'd like to address a question which draws on the question that was asked Cecilia. Here we have a whole room of researchers, potential researchers, who are pro bono researchers. Cecilia has shown us, this is a question for you. Cecilia has shown us that by doing research, it actually can have an impact on improving lives and improving justice. What I'd like to ask Alex is, what are the gaps in the knowledge base that would help you in your work and would help improve the situation for migrants in their country of origin and when they come to the United States? What would you suggest if you had a group of 6 or 7 researchers in front of you? What would you recommend that they would work on? Because their work will seep into the public policy arena eventually and will help your efforts and help your efforts, Agustin. What would you suggest?
Well, I would think that if we continue talking about just the research, there's going to be so much research. And action is what we're missing, right? So I think that although research is important in regards to a specific population, for instance, right now we need to focus on what happened in the 80s. That has not been research. What happened to the youth? How did MS-13 come about? Not just the gang per se, which has been the focus of many documentaries, you know, and books and so on to continue the demonization of a certain population, but what happened to the youth? What happened to that unaccompanied minor that came during that time? And how can you relate to foresee, you know, that there is a wave of other minors coming in, and what to do about it to not make the same mistakes? I think that could be something that's critical in regards of pushing policy, pushing funding to focus on that population to help eradicate another generation of youth who will fall victims to our streets. I think that's important. Now the other part is that, you know, take this research and to push it through advocates, through the foundations that generate those monies, and they're just focused on those 3 primary issues that we spoke about, right? Which the mental health, the reunification of these kids, and the legal representation, which has been like even the administration, that's been one of the main focus, but none of the other. So I think that linking the piece of, like I said, the criminalizing of a generation of our youth and seeing the impact that it's had, you know, through forced deportation, you know, and the forced migration, and the continued cycle of that is what we find ourselves in now. I think that those are critical points, and there are some folks that are trying to do something on it, but it's basic, you know, and it's on thesis, right? So it's not really generating the attention that we'll need to really make change, and I think that that's critical.
Okay, one very last question. Our time's up, but go ahead.
Okay, so I think you've all done a really brilliant job of sketching out a lot of the nuances of the ways in which capitalism, the ways in which state power, the ways in which corruption, the ways in which just outright human cruelty have created this series of rolling problems of incarceration, of detention, of policing more generally. But these are all disembodied processes. I wonder if you could all speak to motivations, like why, and it goes back to this question over here, why, when capital has been very well protected since like classical liberalism, like the 1880s, you know, even before, like why is there this cruelty of the past 20, 30 years different somehow, and like who specifically, based on what motivation, is behind the system logics that you all describe as producing the results that you're all engaging with?
Walk in the park.
Es el manejo del poder, el manejo del control, el manejo del dinero, de los recursos naturales y sociales.
¿Pero por quién?
Por el grupo que está en el poder, el grupo que está dominando actualmente o el que le cede el lugar. Esto porque cuando ustedes preguntan neoliberalismo o autoritarismo en crisis, ¿a qué se refiere eso? Bueno, los cambios sociopolíticos que ha habido en los últimos 40 años ha llevado a que empresas privadas, ya no públicas, es decir, ya no va a salir del dinero del gobierno o del pueblo que se refleja en los fondos para cubrir, por ejemplo, los centros de detención. Los centros de detención, la gente es detenida en un centro de detención privado, de una corporación privada, y los oficiales de deportación son federales, es decir, son del gobierno, o sea, trabajan entre los dos. Es el neoliberalismo. ¿El neoliberalismo qué dice? Privatiza las cosas públicas, vuélvelas privadas, porque nosotros ya no nos damos beneficio para pagarlo. Entonces ellos lo que hacen es saquean la parte pública, ponen una corporación privada, y entonces se da un choque, porque por un lado la gente está detenida en el centro de detención que controla una corporación privada, y por el otro lado el juez federal es el que decide si lo deja liberar o no. O sea, son dos figuras legales con las que estás peleando, pero que además fueron diseñadas así para manejar el control, el poder por el mismo neoliberalismo. Entonces es el grupo político que está en el poder. Nosotros lo podemos ver aquí fehaciente en estos momentos políticos que está viviendo Estados Unidos. La televisión está tratando de imponer a un candidato y está tratando de promover el odio hacia una raza. Ajá. Entonces, en los estudios latinoamericanos lo vemos también. Por ejemplo, en San Diego, cuando yo llegué a vivir a San Diego, me llamó mucho la atención que en los estudios latinoamericanos estaba que estudios chicanos. Y yo digo, bueno, ¿por qué estudios chicanos? Y ahora que Donald Trump dijo sus palabras xenófobas contra los mexicanos, empezaron a sacar unos, en el internet, en las redes sociales, empezaron a sacar unos flyers que le decían a Donald Trump: los indígenas del norte de Estados Unidos, vete, porque tú vienes de Europa. Ajá. Entonces, pero también los mexicanos son indígenas de aquí, y resulta ser que ni los mismos mexicanos se reconocen como indígenas de aquí. ¿Por qué? Porque el grupo que está en el poder los ha ido minimizando para mantener el control de todos los recursos, ¿no? México es un país rico en oro, en plata, en recursos, en muchas cosas. Entonces, todas esas cosas repercuten tanto. Por ejemplo, en la parte LGBT que comentaba ella, actualmente a los homosexuales se les utiliza como que la bandera política, porque los homosexuales trabajan, producen, etcétera, etcétera. Pero cuando se enfrentan a los jueces de asilo político, el fiscal dice: ¿por qué no te vas a tu país? Por ejemplo, en México los homosexuales ya se pueden casar. Y entonces el fiscal dice, te voy a negar el asilo a ti transgénero, a ti homosexual. ¿Por qué? Porque en México no les pasa nada a los homosexuales porque ya se pueden casar. Y entonces uno dice, a ver, momento, usted es fiscal, usted es abogado, ¿cómo puede ser posible que utilice una ley donde un homosexual se puede casar con otro? Cuando esa ley lo único que es el matrimonio civil entre homosexuales. Que un homosexual se haga responsable de su pareja, los dos. Ajá. Pero no los protege de cuando salen a la calle los maten, los asesinen, o sea, no hay una ley contra la homofobia y que penalice la homofobia. Si existiera esa ley, sería diferente. Pero entonces el fiscal dice, no se lo doy porque en su país ya se puede casar y no los discrimina. Y a veces los abogados son abogados y no saben discernir y decirle al fiscal, ¿sabes qué? No, momento, eso solamente le da una protección, pero en la calle lo matan. Es perseguido político, defendió los derechos, ten cuidado. Entonces, es eso, es la pugna por el poder, el control. Vemos que la gente en el poder controla, vemos en este país, dos familias heredan el poder, los Clinton y los Bush, ¿no? Y ahorita ya como que se dieron. Y toda la gente, es que es ridículo, miren, en San Diego la gente ahorita tiene que abandonar departamentos porque les aumentaron a $1,500 a $1,400 por mes, cuando la renta era en 800 y 900. Entonces uno dice, ¿dónde está el apoyo? ¿Y qué resulta? Que la gente ya no gana lo suficiente para comprarse una casa, sino ahora tiene que rentar en una corporación privada. El neoliberalismo es eso, privatizar lo público. Entonces ya no tienes derecho ni a casa ni a nada, porque ya más tienes que vivir para pagar, y eso sí te alcanza. ¿No? Es eso.
Okay, our time's up.
We have a reception, but I want to respond briefly to the why authoritarian neoliberalism. And there's some central elements to it. You check out an article by a theorist named Ian Ruff, but the key element is this. If you remember in the 80s, in the 90s, when I was in when I started my higher education, I started getting into graduate school, everyone promised us that neoliberalism was going to solve all the problems in Latin America. What was the key word back then? Market democracy, right? The idea was that we want market democracies all over Latin America, and that was going to solve the problems. Neoliberalism promised to be a democratizing force. For me, the authoritarian part of the new trend in neoliberalism, even the neoliberals have shredded the fantasy that neoliberalism can bring about democracy. They're saying, in order for this to work, we need security, we need authority. And that's the turn in contemporary neoliberalism. And one of the key elements of that is the installation of the state insulating itself from democratic and popular struggles, making itself. And whenever there's a struggle, we don't know who to go to because GEO is a private corporation, but it has the characteristics of a state. It's the insulation of the state from those democratic popular struggles. The dream of neoliberalism bringing about democracy is over. We're in a new era of an authoritarian neoliberalism without apologies, especially after the crisis of 2008, the crisis of global capitalism. And that's why it's Derechos in crisis, refugees, migrant detention, and authoritarian neoliberalism. So on that note, we got Ubusa.
Why would you want to control? If you didn't have, like, it's a lot of trouble to find a drug as a rule. It's a lot of trouble to create a deportation as a rule. So then why would you do it? And